Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts.
So last week was the first time an asset has actually been taken off Daniel Kinahan, or I think any of the Kinahans, by the Criminal Assets Bureau, which is sort of a remarkable thing in itself. But a house that went through this complicated ownership process, ultimately coming from Jim Mansfield, ended up in Daniel Kinahan's home. And now it's been sold off by the state at a decent price, it has to be said.
Yeah, this is last week, the auction. It was one of these online auctions that are done. It's the typical way I think cab do it now. And, there was a bit of, I think, gamesmanship going on with the bidders that was very slow, starting at the opening price and going up at kind of 1,000, a go. But they have an algorithm that towards the end that has at least 30 seconds without anyone making a bid, or a minute or something like that before they can finish it. So there was a sudden flurry, and it went on 50 minutes longer than it was timed for. And it kind of, and in those 50 minutes went up, I think, nearly 500,000 and ended up selling for 931,000, which was a good bit higher than the valuations any times we'd been writing about it.
Yeah.
Like we were hedging our bets a bit, saying it was probably worth about 750,000. It might be worth more now. But it's a fantastic property, Coldwater Lakes in Saggart. It would have been at the height of the Celtic Tiger, would have been the place to have been acquiring your standalone detached mansion with its own gates and grounds and the whole lot, So it was the perfect, it was a little jewel in the crown, I suppose. And of course, it fell into Kinahan's hands then when, I suppose, in the finances, everybody's finances went a bit haywire. And money apparently had been handed over by the Kinahan cartel.
Because, it was very explicit how it was and what it was handed over.
Yeah, that money was owed. And that basically, when the guards raided it, they found Daniel Kinahan's passport in it, and they found, evidence of, flights and stuff like that taken. There was people who had worked for companies associated with him living there as well. And so, it wasn't contested at all by Kinahan. And it was declared the proceeds of crime. It was actually a good while ago. It took a while for this one to get to market. Like, there's been other ones that were declared the proceeds of crime earlier this year and have already been put on sale. So there was a delay. I remember we went out, one of our colleagues went out and took some pics, even after it had been seized and it was locked up and kind of weeds taken over the Cobbalock driveway and stuff like that. But it was back in gleaming form again when we saw the pictures from inside.
And it is a beautiful home. And of course, it was said, I suppose it did show how close the Bommer Cavana organisation and Daniel Kinahan were at that stage, because it seems to have been sort of partly owned by both of them. And what we had heard and have spoken about and written about in the past was how it was that Jim Mansfield Jr. had taken this money. I think it was actually hand delivered in 2 suitcases. They were talking about something like 4 million, and he had to try and hand over this house as part payment of the debt. It's just an incredible idea that people are going around with suitcases with a couple of, like 4 million, I think it was described as it.
Well, we've seen that so many times. It is how it's done. Yeah. I suppose that's the problem. The drugs get in and they're sold here, and then you have these large chunks of money. Yeah. And I suppose they're no more than the people who are begging to buy their crack cocaine on the street. They can't use that change that they get to the dealer. They have to find somewhere to change it into at least a $5 before the bottom level dealer will accept their money. And it's the same as it goes further up the hill. It turns into 50s, and obviously if it gets further abroad, it'll be €500 notes, and it is a physical issue. Yeah, to get these huge sums of money out of Ireland and to where they need to be, whether it's Dubai or in South America.
It's a huge part now of the whole business is moving it around, but also cleaning it. Like, interestingly, I think Bommer Cavana had left Ireland in the 90s at some point, and I think he had been investigated by CAB for, I think there was a house at that stage was put under investigation, but it was all much smaller scale, obviously, than he became.
And I think he was a landlord at that stage.
Yeah.
But that definitely informed his decision, to say the least, to get out of Dodge. I mean, and he wasn't the only one. The likes of George the Penguin Mitchell and, of course, Johnny Morrissey and all these guys, they all left Ireland at that time, around the same time, because they had the brains. Plus, they also had the assets that they didn't want to lose. And
no, I mean, they were the first wave of criminals who were targeted by, and that shows you how Bommer, even then, was regarded as being, obviously not what he became, but regarded as being that top level of criminal figure, even though he was a young man at that stage. Of course, it's not the end of it's not the last asset, this house in Coldwater Lakes, that CAB or their UK equivalents are likely to go after when it comes to Bomber.
No, I mean, there has to be. I mean, if you remember, I think the CAB case was that a couple of the gang members, including Cavana, they turned up as 4.5 million.
Yeah.
And this is like 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
And of course, they had a big party. They stayed over in the area. And this was supposed to be the investment into various properties, which fell through, as we know. But I mean, it gives you a kind of an idea of the scale of money that they were making. And like, we don't really know, was that the peak of their earning power? Like right at the height of the tail to tiger? It's probably the most money they were making out of a kilo cocaine ever in Ireland. At that time, it would have been a huge demand. But but since then, like the Kinahan cartel, went on to be a far larger organization, certainly as big a money laundering organization as it is a drug dealing operation. So it's hard to know if the likes of Cavana and some other well-known members of the gang walking into City West Hotel with 2 suitcases with 4.5 million, was that the midpoint?
I'd say it was the midpoint, to be honest. I think as they became into the mid 2010s, that they became much bigger wholesalers, I think, rather than sort of localized dealers. I mean, we also we see that the CAB cases are really making an impact. And there was another home, as it finally seized today, to do with the Chipers.
The Chipers, yeah. No, this is Edward and Natalie Chiper. So this is their White House, it's called, in Tullyard in County Louth, about 7 kilometres north of Drogheda.
Yeah.
And it's they bought it as a shell for 200,000. And CAB's case was that they spent another $1 million on it. It's a fabulously appointed house. It's got something like, they estimated 126,000 spent on the dog run.
Right. Well, what is a dog run?
I'm not sure. I guess it's a fenced off area that has a little bit of indoors and outdoors, so the dog can kind of pretend he's happy.
Okay.
But these are the dogs that were let loose in the grounds at night. So I think there was a security element to them. But so like this morning, as we record this, CAB officers went into the White House and took it over. This is all done by agreement.
Yeah.
I think it was in the October CAB hearings that it was mentioned that the case had been settled. And we were able to get details of the case then, which was interesting. Self and Nicola spoke about that one previously, but like it turns out the CAB case was that Edward Chiper was very much the head of an international drug smuggling gang, Moldovan national. They listed off all the various members of the gang who were kind of employed in their so-called legitimate companies. He held himself out as a painter decorator, and these guys were on the books. And there was a lot of money sloshing around and going back and forth between Moldova and Ireland. And of course, they mentioned like the Drug Enforcement Administration and the Maritime Analysis Group had all been tapped up for information. And they were saying, this gang, we're aware of them. And, they use sailboats to get drugs from North Africa into Spain. And from there, both towards Moldova and Russia, as well as to Ireland. So, I mean, you're not talking about a small-time operation. These are kind of top-end, elite, premiership level.
And is it CAB's case that he was directing all of this from Ireland? But
CAB's case is exactly that he was the leader of this Moldovan gang, and he'd been based in Ireland, and he was here more than 20 years. Yeah. Started off in Galway and ended up then in this particular place in Louth. And he had a couple of kind of relatively small run-ins with the forces of law and order over those 2 decades, but it was nothing major. And I think it was in 2019 they raided the house and they found, I think, 47 kilos of cannabis, which kind of, I think they already knew who he was at that stage. That was very much said in the CAB affidavits, that they're kind of aware that he was his international drugs gang leader. Now, there was no charges dropped against them, there was no charges ultimately brought against him or his wife, Natalie. She was both arrested. They both spent a bit of time in custody at the time, but the DPP felt there wasn't a case because there wasn't CCTV on the warehouse or the garage where the drugs are found, and they felt that there would have been an argument there to say that somebody else could have left the drugs, but they went after their assets anyway. So, I mean, they took the house by agreement, and they went in this morning to take it, and they'll get to keep 10% of that sale. So whatever eventually goes for, I think the Chipers will get to keep 20%. But there was 98,000 in a bank account that was also seized. I think there was a Mercedes as well. So I'm not sure. I think there might have been some jewellery taken as well. But I think they were able to show there was a certain amount of finances that weren't fully deemed the proceeds of crime. So that's what the 10% represents there.
Yeah. I mean, we also wrote again about another house over the weekend. You wrote about Mike Nash, which again you can see, I suppose, you see two things. You see, for a start, the scale of the money that is sloshing around this business allegedly. And then you also must get to the point where you wonder, can any of these guys in the future ever expect to own a home in Ireland safely?
Yeah, it'd be tricky, I think. I mean, I suppose the story about Mike Nash is, I suppose it's really that the property is in his wife or partner's name, and Mairead Conole.
Yeah.
And we had a look at the land registry, and and she took ownership of that back in the 90s, and the previous owners had the same surname. So I presume it was it's probably handed down via the family. Yeah. So there's no suggestion that it was bought or acquired with the proceeds of crime, which is probably why it wasn't gone after by the Criminal Assets Bureau. But it was mentioned in the affidavits in the Bone Motors case, in which Mike Nash was seen as having a controlling interest. He and his wife were both named, in the evidence, and one of the lines of evidence mentioned in this was that they were renovating this disused cottage, it's an old stone cottage, and it was all been done in cash. So this is part of their kind of background to build up a picture of somebody who seems to have a lot of cash. Yeah, she had her own boutique business selling clothes, but I suppose it was the Criminal Assets Bureau that all these cars and all this cash that he had, he couldn't have it through legitimate means. They went through all his car firms and showed that there's no way he could have provided the seed capital for Bone Motors, which was eventually described as being a vehicle set up purely to launder drugs gang money. And I'm just Alex Owens, the judge, talked about it, it had 5 million in its first year, and was 8 million turnover in the second year, which would make it a remarkable success story, considering that a lot of these were it was all used cars being bought for cash in the UK and auctioned off. And it was I suppose in one sense, it was a pretty crude attempt at trying to launder money. There was all bad record keeping and all the rest. And I suppose, and Mike Nash came into it in that, of the 110 cars seized, X amount were purportedly belonging to him. He had made a claim on different occasions. He'd been, the guards were able to say, look, he was in the porter cabin at Bone Motors when they were called, and so they were able to link him to it. No, it didn't fully go against. It didn't all go against him. I think there was 2 cars. The one outside his house that were seized by cab, a Ford Ranger or something like that. It was a nice car. He got the money back for that. So I mean, but 98% of it, I think, was pretty much taken by cab. So it was just. But I mean, one of the interesting roles as well, or one of the interesting roles that he played was that he. And again, his wife was mentioned in this part of it as well, that they were part of a kind of a scheme to try and set up a mirror image of this Bone Motors in the Czech Republic. And then that was going to become another vehicle for it. And the guy they'd use is this character, Michael Grimes. I don't even remember. Nicola did an interview with him a couple of years back, and he talked about having helped 9 or 10 people who had been targeted by cab. He's kind of like I suppose, a financial advisor to the underworld, or people connected to the underworld. And I think the most famous one we know of would have been Tony Lanahan, who ran a whole series of brothels in Cork. And I think, Michael Grimes have been investigated, or certainly his financial dealings are investigated. So, but whatever happened between him and Mike Nash and Mairead Conole, ended up falling out, and the Nash and his wife then were investigated by the guards over allegations of threats being made to kill Michael Grimes, but in the end there was no prosecution taken on that either. But it gives you an insight into where they were going, and that they were trying to step up into a kind of a more sophisticated level of I suppose, moving their money around.
Yeah. And I mean, it shows again the international aspect of these things, because the money can just go across those borders and all of a sudden it becomes so much more difficult to track. And of course, it's the same as what Bommer Cavana had in terms of a car business and operating in England and in Ireland, and the movement of cars between him and his brother-in-law, Liam Byrne, was one of the primary ways of that money was being laundered as well. Are they? So, do you think these guys can continue to buy houses and live around Ireland? I mean, are those days gone for criminals? Because you can see how forensic and how skilled the cab investigations have become.
I can't see how they could do it, not in their own name. And I mean, and even if it's somebody connected to them, because they've all tried that. We saw that in the Ross Browning case, where there was none of the properties were in his name, but it was decided that he was in control of them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and they were still able to seize them. So, I mean, there's no point in getting somebody to buy a house for cash for $500,000 and spending another $1 million on doing it up in with the finest of Italian marble or whatever it is you want to spend your money on.
Because if you look back in the day, I mean, John Gilligan, as far as I remember, bought his house in his own name and put himself on the deeds. I mean, we've moved past that, but are we getting to the point where certainly the renovations, I think, was looked as like a free shot by criminals at one stage, that, even if you could get in trouble with buying the house, nobody was ever going to look at that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no, well, I think there probably is something there if, that they can spend money on a house and it's going to be hard to seize it.
Yeah.
If the value of the house is more than the renovation still. Yeah. But I'm sure there's a fine line. If they say criminal money was used to completely transform this house that you bought for 10 grand, and it's now worth 500,000. Yeah. In that case, they can say, well, we're going to seize it, and when we sell it, you can get the 10 grand back plus interest, or and I mean, and that's the way I imagine they would look at it. Yeah. But it is, I mean, it is not harder. I mean, there's always that view in Irish law that the family home is sacrosanct, and no judge is going to throw a family out of their home. Now, we have seen it with CAB, but that's on the basis that, okay, you have a home, but you have other alternatives and there's other places you can go to. Yeah. And to say it's your only viable option of accommodation isn't true. Yeah. And they've kind of just brushed that aside and gone for the properties. Yeah. And I mean, and it's a real, I mean, when you add it up, I mean, like say this year, there's been, I think, over 3 million worth of properties kind of sold. Some of them were quite small. Some of them, relatively, ordinary houses. Yeah. But some then, say, for instance, like David Waldron's house, Darview Heights, that, he put 1.2 million in as well, but sold for 522,000, But I mean, that's about punishing in a sense. It's about, well, it's not about punishing. It's about denying the assets. And it does hurt. And I mean, and, they kind of would have thought, well, this money is sunk and, it's sunk into the property and it's kind of retirement. So at the very least, I'll always be able to sell it and I'll get something back. But this is CAB's way of saying, no, you're not gonna have a gangland pension in that regard. No,
or it's an act of deterrence, I think, as much as anything, that, none of these assets are, you might be able to buy them, but you won't be able to hold on to them. And it must be a disincentive. I suppose the ultimate way that the Kinahans went, we believe now, is cryptocurrency, and that's probably the next frontier. And I would imagine if we're still employed and not totally grey, male and stale, in 10 years' time, we'll be trying to talk about crypto seizures by CAB. I'd
say they're going to double their money then, the Kinahan cartel, over the next year when Donald Trump takes power. It looks like the cryptocurrency community are very happy with this, and it's gone up 192% Bitcoin. So I mean, it's been a wonderful investing opportunity for Ireland's gangland, I think. It has, but wait till
something goes wrong, so it can go up, can come down.
Yeah, well, we'll see about that.
Thanks, Eamon.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.